So I just got back from my first Paris Fashion Week. Previously, my experience with Fashion Week has always been from my phone, right? You see videos of runway shows, paparazzi photos, street style, events. Now, this was not a sponsored trip. In fact, I did not get invited to any runway shows at all. But what I did get invited to is showrooms. The reality is most brands don't put on runway shows. They're very expensive to produce. What they do is they rent showrooms where they show their new collections to press and buyers. So I'm going to take you through the brands I saw, the designers I met, what I talked to them about. For me, it was just, I'm following my curiosity here. So hopefully you're interested in the same things I am, which is what are the realities of being an independent designer in today's day and age? What are the trends? What are people working on? What are they inspired by? I'm going to start off with a little general info because I don't want to assume that everyone knows everything about the fashion industry. I certainly don't. I learn new things all the time. Often, brands will put out 2 collections every year, an autumn-winter collection and a spring-summer collection, and they make those clothes well in advance of when you see them in the stores. So they design and develop a certain number of pieces for their collection, depending on how big the brand is, and then they go to fashion weeks, which are essentially trade shows, to show off their wares to buyers. These buyers work for stores, brick-and-mortar stores, online stores, and these buyers will go and see what the brands have to offer, and they'll put in orders for their stores. What I attended was the Paris Men's Fashion Week, where people were showing their autumn-winter collections for 2026. And so generally, people are trying to show their collections 6 months before you'll see them in stores. One thing I want to note is that the vast majority of designers I talk to either consider their clothing to be unisex or make collections for both men and women. They just decided to attend Men's Fashion Week for one reason or another. So my first stop was at Maison Liaison, which is an agency actually created by a store, which I don't believe is very common. Agencies essentially help brands get out there. They help host them at trade shows and make sure that they find buyers. This agency was created by Ben, who owns his own store in New York City called & Sons, which is a great store. I highly recommend it. He essentially has been finding these brands that he really believes in, and he wants to help them succeed and find their buyers and do well in the industry. So he has this agency, Maison Liaison. They had a couple of brands in the showroom. I started at Archie, which was sort of the brand that drew me in. The designer's name is Mark Smith Clark, and this is a New York City brand. Mark is not a New York City native, but everything is made in New York City in the garment district. He has an office right below where the production is done, and he is the only person working at this brand, and he doesn't even do it full time yet because it doesn't make enough to sustain him. I consider Archie part of this new cohort of brands that is extremely focused on fabric and textile development and make slightly oversized, flowy, unisex clothing. So Mark was born and raised in New Mexico and spent a fair amount of time in his 20s in Denver, but he has been living in New York City coming up on 10 years now. And he said he was really inspired on artists who focus on the passage of time. He named artists like Onkawara, Bill Viola, Hamish Fulton, and Dwayne Michaels, which they are all worth putting research and time in because they're fabulous artists. I personally was only familiar with Onkawara because his art is featured at the Dia Beacon, a museum in the Hudson Valley, not that far from New York City. And it was very interesting. He essentially painted little squares with the date on them, and they all have different paints and different feelings, and he did it for years and years and years. But overall, it's addressing that a day is its own entity within the passage of time. And at the same time sort of confronts our construction of the calendar, that it is such a human concept, this sort of quantification of time. So he said he enjoys artists who use their medium to shake you out of your status quo regarding what it feels like to exist within one time frame your whole life. And so he's been thinking a lot about his time living in the West versus the East Coast, and wanted to include elements of frontier symbolism, which are waxed fabrics, plaid flannels, meltons, tweeds, lambskin suedes. So we really wanted to acknowledge the outdoorsy culture, the lodge culture of the Western US, and also not be necessarily tethered to that because he is in a different time frame in his life. One piece that I thought really spoke to that was this jacket that included fibers from older sheep, and the dye just doesn't really adhere to those. So you have this sort of speckled effect throughout. To me, this technique evokes how our past lives show up in our present moment and how all phases of life can exist simultaneously. He was also the first designer that I spoke to. Well, he was the first designer that I spoke to overall, but he was the first one I spoke to who mentioned that he was using a fabric that included washi. Washi, I'm sure you've heard of it before, but usually you think of it as washi tape, which is from Japan, but really washi is just a paper made from mulberry trees. So he was using a fabric that was 50% washi, and it was mixed with nylon.
It's got like a really dry, crinkly feel, but very breathable and still heavy enough for like a mid-layer in the winter.
He said he wanted to use a non-traditional canvas fabric for potentially his most traditional shirting option of the season. And he likes that the mill weaves nylon entirely in the warp and the washi entirely in the weft. So it's weaved like that. I don't know what I'm doing with my hands. I'll probably just put a picture so you guys can understand it better. Mark was kind enough to talk business with me because I was really interested to see how designers felt like the industry and their personal businesses are going. And he said he is trying to lower prices if possible. And this is something that I did hear a couple of times, which is these designers have a really specific belief in creating their clothes with beautiful fabrics and high quality construction, but all of these elements wind up with pretty high price tags. But they want their clothes to be worn, you know? It's not fun to just make a beautiful piece that no one can buy. So he is, if possible, trying to scale up and to lower cost. The next person I talked to was Alejandro Gutierrez of Graziano Gutierrez, which was founded in 2018 by Alejandro and Samuel. And the main thrust of the brand is that they collaborate with artisan textile makers in Mexico. They have seen a big push in their sales from interest and support and marketing by both Throwing Fits and Blackbird Spyplane. If you're not familiar with those, Blackbird Spyplane is a really big fashion Substack, and Throwing Fits is a podcast, but they also do all sorts of other little projects, including hosting private sales, which is very interesting. Alejandro works on the project full-time. There are sort of two lines within the brand, one which is artisan, which he cuts and sews himself, and the other which has its production made in a factory. Overall, most clothing is made in factories, to be clear. That doesn't mean it's not handmade. People work in factories to make clothing, but it's really the difference between something being made by the designer themselves or at an atelier where like they do everything in-house versus creating a piece, putting together a tech pack, which is specifications on how to make that piece of clothing, and then sending it out to a factory where they produce it for you. The most interesting thing I learned from my conversation with Alejandro is that they are using colored cotton. So cotton, as we think of it, right, is this almost pure white ball that comes out of the plant. They have started using heritage types of cotton, which are brown and green and other sort of earthy colors. One of the most well-known figures in the colored cotton scene is called Sally Fox, and she is based out of the west coast of the US. Her sort of origin story goes that while she was in college, she heard about someone who became very sick or maybe even passed away from exposure to the chemicals in dye. She was already interested in clothing, she was interested in textile work, and from that point on, she swore off artificial dyes. Now, we all know that clothing production is a highly polluting industry. We make a lot of clothing and it severely affects our environment. Today, as much as 90% of our clothing is dyed synthetically. It requires incredible amounts of water and often toxic chemicals in production. It's possible that 200 tons of water is used for every ton of textiles that need to be dyed. And then all that water that is now filled with residual dyes, hazardous chemicals, heavy metals, microfibers, and mordants, which is the chemical used to bond dye to the fabric, ends up back in the environment. On top of that, there are also serious adverse health effects to the people who work in these facilities. Now, of course, natural dyes have their own set of problems. They also demand water usage to grow the plants to create the natural dyes. They pollute in the same way that any farming industry does. Additionally, even if the dye you use is non-synthetic, then you still have to be using a mordant, which is a chemical, to bind it to the fabric. Some brands do not use mordants to dye their fabrics, but ultimately what you wind up is clothing that will fade and change over time, which in our modern era is not what you expect from your clothing. Of course, an easy answer to all of this is we just need to produce less stuff in general. Do I think that change in our consumption habits is going to happen in my lifetime? One can only hope. Unfortunately, I'm feeling a little bit pessimistic. Anyway, one of the answers that people have come up with to this issue is to do colored fiber. So naturally colored cotton in our clothes, you either don't need to dye them or you just need to use much less dye. Sally was introduced to colored cotton after college, and she was told there was no market for it. The problem was with the fiber. It was rough, it was short, and it was extraordinarily difficult to spin. So she started through conventional breeding means to develop a better fiber. By the mid-1990s, Fox was operating the largest scale colored cotton farm in the world. These strains of cotton are also, for whatever reason, pest repellent, so they don't need pesticides. Unfortunately, not long after that, the domestic American textile industry imploded. A lot of places are moving production overseas, the labor is cheaper, and there are less restrictions. So you can dye things, you don't need to clean it that much, and you can put it back in the environment. Cleaning dye waste can actually be the most expensive part of textile production. Fox's company was purchased by an angel investor, which I had to look up what an angel investor is. I think it pretty much just means someone who is not so worried about your profits, but more so just wants to help your company survive. So it still exists. Fox noted, there is one mill in Japan that has been buying cotton from me, and without them, I would not still be in business. Through that mill, named Taishobo, she has connected to several apparel customers such as Studio Dartisan and 45R. I love 45R. In terms of the future, she said, if I had a wish, it would be that I was funded by some foundation somewhere and I could do the microbiological work of identifying how to get these colors to shift. If it has the right environment, you can get blues, you can get pinks. Graziano and Gutierrez are also working with a colored cotton that is indigenous to Oaxaca. It grows to a beautiful shade of brown, but again, because of these short fibers, it can't be professionally woven at industrial mills, so instead, they hand weave it on backstrap looms in Oaxaca. They do also use petal looms. Graziano and Gutierrez also use dyes from that region. They use a wild marigold and an indigo dye. The color of these dyes, it seems, depend on a whole bunch of variables.
And we pretty much just work based on the textiles available because, for example, this is only available for fall winter because they need to collect the cotton and the textile and dye it during the winter season. And then depending on the rain season, the color might come out more blue or more yellow.
Overall, this is slow fashion. This stuff takes a long time to make. These dyes are very finicky. Some things can only be dyed in certain seasons. You know, you're really moving with the natural rhythms. Finally, I talked to the designer for William Frederick, whose name is not William Frederick, it's Bill McNichol, and I believe William Frederick is named for his grandfather. This brand was founded in 2018. A lot of the brands I talked to were founded in the last 5 to 10 years. These are young brands, and they are based in Cleveland, Ohio. They are currently in 15 stores across the US, Canada, and Japan. He seems to be doing fairly well. All of the fabrics for his collection were woven in Ireland, France, Japan, and Italy. Production originally took place in Cleveland, but he's expanded it out now to New York City's Garment District, Long Island City, Ridgewood, Queens, and Detroit. My favorites were the airport jacket and a heavyweight 13-ounce corduroy that is sun-dried in Japan. He also had this cotton linen pin check shirt that they hang in the windiest region of Japan, which creates this permanent creasing and wrinkling in the fabric. I mean, this is really nerdy stuff. He also had a piece that was made with a fabric that included washi, so it is 46% linen, 54% washi, and it's a coffee-dyed linen washi canvas. After I got back from Paris, I also saw that Ken Sakata has a piece for his brand Front Office that is using a cotton washi fabric. So for whatever reason, washi is hot right now. I actually asked Bill, I was like, why do you think, what's going on with the washi thing? And he thinks it's an evolution of hemp.
I feel like it came on really strongly after hemp became very normalized, and now washi's
kind of the next thing.
Yeah, and it's like, what's after washi? But yeah,
right.
There was like the Lycocell and tinsel era, and then it was hemp, and now you're getting a lot of washi.
The other thing that stood out to me about that linen washi piece is that it was coffee dyed, and it's part of a food textile program where they dye with stuff like leftover coffee grounds or red turnip juice. I was asking Bill a little bit about sustainability. We were joking about this because, and this was a thing when I worked in podcasting too, no one really wants to talk about sustainability. We were also watching this movie recently, and I don't remember the name, but it was a photographer, and he went to the North Pole and was taking pictures of polar bears, and he comes back and his agent is like, we can't do global warming. No one wants to talk about global warming. No one wants to hear about global warming. And the reason for that is it's a downer, right? Everyone sort of knows, well, hopefully everyone knows that it's happening. Everyone accepts that it's happening, but it's just not a pleasant thing for people to experience and to hear, especially as a business pitch. And so when you're selling your clothes, you don't want to be like, well, this is so sustainable, you should buy it. People want to buy things because they're cute and they're the right price. Bill was saying, well, I don't really want to talk about sustainability necessarily, but you should get the vibe that these things are well made in the right way. That should be part of the vibe of the company. And it shouldn't necessarily be the number one focus or the thing you have to step out in front and say, I am a sustainable creator. Also because, like I said, what is sustainability? You're producing something inherently at the end of the day, right? You can try to produce it in a way that feels good for your sense of morality, but it's difficult to come out and be like, I'm sustainability oriented. When really you are a designer, you're an artist, and you want to make things in a way that you think creates a good product and works for your vision. And hopefully sustainability is part of that inherently. I actually found more of his comments on this in an article for Cleveland Magazine. He said, "I think the true foundation of sustainability that the fashion industry continues to ignore from a discussion standpoint is humans, trade, and skill. I think the most important factor of sustainability is the production angle. And I think we get so focused on, does this have polyester? And to me, that's just low-hanging fruit. It's very easy to say, this is synthetic and that's bad." So for him, he's very focused on trade skill set retention in communities, being from Cleveland, and he finds that just as important to address as the quality of fabrics fashion houses are using in production. For his part, creating pathways to support and grow local talent is a key way McNichol chooses to operate his brand's production process from beginning to end. This is meaningful to me, trying to create a pipeline from Kent State to here, as opposed to furthering traffic from Kent State to New York. I want to help the growth of a circular economy within my own community. And overall, I agree. There are many different ways we can talk about sustainability. Now, before we get any further, I want to thank Unbound Merino, our sponsor for this video. Not the sponsor for the trip, but the sponsor for this video. They sent me 3 versions of their women's long sleeve merino crew. I took 2 of them on my trip to Paris. Paris, the weather was actually so nice, especially compared to New York. I came back to New York right before the snowstorm, and it has been below freezing every day since. Paris was actually about 50 to 40 degrees Fahrenheit every day, which was lovely. So I didn't have to go crazy, but essentially what I did is I brought the black long sleeve and the white long sleeve, and I wore them as underlayers. Have I talked about this before? This is sort of a joke in the fashion community that like people don't really wash their clothing because you get so much natural fiber clothing and things that are finicky and things that need to be dry cleaned, and you wind up just not washing your clothing very much. Anyway, for a trip, and I actually tacked on another trip afterwards. I went to DC before I came back to New York, and then I got stuck there for a trip where I did no clothes washing and I was walking around all day with this as my undershirt. Like, they don't smell. And I wear deodorant and I'm not a crazy sweater, but it's super nice to be able to have an undershirt that you don't have to pack like 20 of. You can just have one and wear one. In my case, it was 2. They're also temperature regulating. They keep you warm when you're cold and cold when you're warm. So they work for all sorts of environments, all sorts of weathers. If you guys are interested in Unbound Merino, I will leave some information below in the description box, or you can scan this QR code. And remember, new customers always get 10% off their first purchase. Okay, on with the show. My next stop, which unfortunately I was very late to, so that was my bad, is I went to this showroom called Awaken. Now, this showroom, unfortunately, for me, was a little bit more buyer-oriented, I would say. It was much busier, and the designers weren't necessarily there at each booth to talk you through the designs. So I didn't get as much of that good information that I had at Maison Liaison. So I went to a couple of brands. I looked at Cawley, Story MFG, Gander, and Kate Walz. Story MFG I'm familiar with, potentially because so many people in my Discord really like Story MFG. I don't own any of their pieces, but both them and Cawley are based in the UK. Cawley was started in 2017 by Hannah Cawley. Every piece of clothing is hand cut and made in England. Similar ideas here. Cawley is about the quality of making, the integrity of craftsmanship, and they have a real commitment to traditional British textile processes. Story MFG, so cute, founded in 2013 by Katie and Saeed Al-Rubai. It's based in London. I kind of feel like in person, I don't know if it was just this collection, it does feel a little bit like toddler clothes for grown-ups. That sounds derisive. That sounds mean. But it's really cute, and I think there's like a place for that. And me as a person, I love childhood aesthetics. I particularly like storybook aesthetics, I would say. Like, I love Le Petit Prince. I like Babar. I don't know. There's something to that I find really joyful. And I think there's a total market for things that we think like toddlers should wear. And also, now I'm getting into weird stuff, but I do think like the silhouette of toddler clothing is always so cute. And a lot of times they do have those little balloon pants, maybe for ease of movement and comfort. And yeah, we should have those too. Why do only toddlers get those? We also want elasticated corduroy balloon pants, The surprise of my trip to Awaken was this brand called Gander, because we were sort of describing what we were interested in, and our lovely sales associate brought us downstairs, and the designer for Gander was there. So his name is Callum Gregory, and he was born in Manchester. This is very Manchester based. A lot of the clothing is named after things around Manchester, I believe. And the team is just him plus one other person. It's still a relatively new brand. Everything is made in factories. I don't think he makes anything in his own production facilities. And that has brought the cost down, as you can see, compared to a lot of the other brands we have talked about. While we were there were Japanese buyers looking at his stuff because I was asking him about, who stocks his brand. And they were like, oh yeah, we're from 1LDK. And me and my husband have been to 1LDK in Tokyo. They have a couple of different locations. We're like, yeah, we know you guys. The last brand we saw at Awaken is called Kate Walz. Full disclosure, I know Kate. I know her boyfriend. They are very kind acquaintances from New York City. So we saw Kate's stuff, saw the new collection. They weren't there in the showroom. I think they were on their way, but we had to jet. We had, again, another thing that we were already late to. They had this shirt and tie styled in the same fabric, which was, I think, the first time I saw it. But then, once you see something once, you see it again and again. I saw that a couple of different times throughout my trip. They also had this cummerbund, which was also like a purse or like a, oh my God, what is it called when you have a fanny pack. That's what they're called. It was like a cummerbund fanny pack, which is a very cute, ingenious idea. I'd love to see someone wear it. Also, the music was so loud there. These places are really set up like shopping environments. The lighting is not great for photo or video. The sound is obviously, I captured some sound, but I'm not going to go in and ask them to turn down the music because I want to interview someone. Because, most people there are buyers. They're not press. And even if they are press, they're probably, going to write an article. They're not necessarily going to make a video. So anyway, I was a little bit of an outlier complaining about how loud the music was. Okay. We should go. Then, we saw other friends. Maximillian Mogg was there and our friend Nat. And they were doing a trunk show, I believe, in Paris. They have a very interesting business because they have a ready-to-wear section. I think they're being carried in Beams or Beams Plus right now, but they also do a real made-to-measure business because they're a tailoring business. And I tried on a coat from them, which is so reminiscent of a coat I have from my grandfather. It's, I guess, vintage at this point. My grandfather was a lawyer, so it's that same, it's just like very suave man in business look, but vintage. It was gorgeous, but technically I already have a coat like that, so not on my list of things I need. So we were really only in Paris for 4 days. The first day we came in off the red eye. It's the morning. We met up with my godmother. We put our stuff down, and then we sort of tried to stay out for as long as possible so we didn't crash and sleep when we weren't supposed to. The second day, we were kind of around town doing some chatting, and we met up with Ashley Ogawa Clark for lunch. Ashley is a Vogue writer who I had DM'd with a little bit because he lives in Tokyo. And while I was in Tokyo, I think he actually saw me and he was like, hello, but I didn't know him at that point. So I just got a DM from someone being like, I think I saw you in Tokyo. And I was like, okay, sure. Fast forward 6 months later, I'm like, oh my God, Ashley, I'd love to hang out. So we got together at a cafe and just chatted it up. We had a lovely, lovely time. He gave me a hot tip. He was like, definitely go and check out the Gathering showroom. So I DM'd just on Instagram. This whole industry runs off of Instagram. You have no idea. I'm like being sent assets on Instagram these days, which is not what I thought would happen. I'm like still a very much email person. But Ashley was like, go see Gathering. I loved their stuff a lot. Hader, the designer, is very personable. You'll love it. So I DM'd them. They were like, sure, come by, sort of at the end of the day. So I went, and right off the bat, I mean, Hader, he's a real personality, and I love a personality.
Sure. Yeah. So sorry, I'm very scared of like journalists and media people.
Oh,
we don't have to do this. No, I would love to do this. I need to do more of this. I need to try. I need to make an effort.
Yeah.
But
exposure therapy. This is a very new brand. It was started in June 2024 by Hader Salim, and it's heavily inspired by his multicultural upbringing in London. He has traveled a lot in North Africa, parts of Asia, and Turkey, and while he was traveling, he was collecting rolls of fabric. I was like, not fabric samples. He was like, no, rolls. I was like, how are you storing that? He was like, it was tough. You run out of space after a while, but you can use it for all sorts of different things. And in 2024, he made about 5 styles for a store in London called UJNG, and they sold out. It did very, very well. Those styles were the farmer jacket, farmer pant, farmer shirt, and fisherman pant, which you can find on his website. The general idea behind the brand is to make sort of familiar silhouettes in new textiles. Like I said, This cohort is so focused on fabrics, on textiles. And he as well not only had amazing fabrics, but also really beautiful buttons. They had these shell buttons, they had ceramic buttons, and he said usually shell buttons are pearlescent. They use that shiny side, but his were more of a mix. And I did ask him if ceramic buttons, because you don't see ceramic buttons that often. I was like, are those more fragile? Like, why don't people use them?
I assume the issue with ceramics is that they're more prone to breakage, or is that not true?
It happens. We'll give you extra.
any button
we'll give you
will
extra. Or maybe you put another button on there. I kind of like that. I kind of like that whole, like, you know, sorry to get off philosophical, but like life is quite cyclical. Spirituality is, community is, friendship is, relationship is. Life just goes up and down in different waves. Even when you're going up, it still goes up and down. There's no such thing as that. So with that in mind, why can't garments be the same thing? Why can't they go through wear and tear and repair? And that should be part of your garment history. And I'm a big, like, advocate for that.
Yeah.
I have been practicing my English.
And he's right. There's a fine line in sustainability. Again, this concept of sustainability between designing things that are less prone to wear and tear, like using a polyblend thread to stitch garments together, that will hold a garment together better and longer instead of cotton, but that introduces plastic right into the production. But there are also things that are just beautiful craft, like a ceramic button that can and should be replaced if it breaks, which buttons always, you lose them, you break them, that's natural. One of the most interesting parts of our conversation was his sort of rejection of patterns. A pattern is essentially like, so you get a textile to make the piece of clothing, you have a pattern that you cut out of the textile and then you sew all those pieces together, and that's what the clothing becomes. There are people that design patterns, designers design patterns, but not all designers design patterns. Sometimes they work with someone called a pattern maker. And Hader was like, I am not interested in developing new patterns or exploring patterns. My main purpose is to serve fabric and materials.
But for me, the fabric is primary, always.
Yes.
And I lead with fabric.
Yes.
Colors, feeling, texture, even like, block print linings.
Yes.
That I really like.
I like the linings a lot.
Yeah, that's the whole gathering vibe. It's like a homeless but cute. It's menswear but a little bit feminine. You know, like it's always got that little. You've got big curvy collars and it's a little bit silly. Like our whole vibe is just to be a little bit silly. Like.
I 100% agree with that.
I'm a very silly guy.
I talked to him again about this a little later because I was like, tell me more about what that means. Because don't you have to be creating patterns to like have a clothing brand? And he said yes. Ultimately, I think what I've gathered is he just really doesn't like that process. It's not the thing that's exciting and artistic to him. So he worked with a pattern maker who is very well regarded. And again, a lot of people work with pattern makers. That is not uncommon. He said, I see patterns quite like algebra now. It's not complicated, but I'm not interested in creating shape and design through patterns. I don't want that to be my identity or legacy. It's necessary, but I don't care to be known for it. So his idea for the brand moving forward is to reference iconic and classic shapes of menswear that he grew up with in London. Things from Stone Island, CP Company, Ralph, Lauren, Double RL, Levi's, Carhartt, etc. And streetwear shapes too. And combine this with these textiles, these handmade textiles from Asia and Africa, and create new clothing from that. Possibly my favorite piece was this bomber jacket. It is hand painted with natural dyes in Rajasthan, India. It is double zipped and reversible.
This whole little egg shape and just lots of pleats and fabric. And
yeah.
The more gathering, the better. That was a joke. Ceramic buttons.
Another piece that I think is really illustrative of this concept is this striped hoodie shirt, which is inspired by jaleba, which is worn in North Africa. Interestingly enough, he made this point that even though the inception of the brand is to create with fabrics from Africa and Asia, he has been sort of embracing his UK culture as well, which I totally understood because as someone who is growing up in a country where you're not part of the ethnic majority, you're not English ethnically, you have this sort of feeling of rejection. You're like, I want to embrace where my family is from because you, to a certain degree, feel like an other and you feel rejected. And so you're trying to embrace these other parts of yourself. But you get older and you're like, but I am British. I was born and raised here. You have a lot of that culture within you. So yeah, he is highlighting, embracing his connection to the UK as well, of course. And he's doing a take on a wax coat with fabric from Scotland. We were really hanging out And he's one of those people, I'm not good at this, but he was like, let's be friends. Like, we're going to be friends. And I'm just not a very effusive person sometimes. Or like, even if I'm thinking something like, oh, we're getting along really well, like I don't say it. He asked us to come back the next day to model some of the clothes. So me and my husband are in the lookbook for this season. And yeah, I just thought the interview, I mic'd him up fully, which I hadn't done for anyone else. And the music was soft enough. So I released the whole interview on my Patreon. If you guys are interested, I will leave the Patreon information below for you to sign up.
Oh, it's so cute.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's cute. That's the whole vibe of gathering. It's like, oh, it looks kind of like artisanal, but it's just, we just want to look cute. Like, we just want to have a nice time and, you know.
That's very cute.
I love it.
Yeah.
So that was day 3. Our last full day in Paris was a Thursday. And Paris Men's Fashion Week went on for like 4 days more, but I couldn't stay. I had some like family stuff to do in DC that weekend. So we flew back on Friday. The start of our last day on Thursday was at Cottle, which in Japanese they pronounce Cottle. And it was fabulous. I had a fabulous time. I don't know how else to say it. The designer was there. And if you know this brand has been covered. Blackbird Spy Plane did a pretty in-depth interview with them where they visited them at their atelier in Japan in the Okayama region. I guess I just didn't know what to expect. I kind of made the appointment, I was like, sure, let's look at this brand. Like, I hadn't seen any of their clothes in person. I don't know anyone who owns any of their clothes. It was a little bit on a whim, and we went in and the whole showroom was just for their brand. No one else was there. So we did like a full almost 30-minute conversation with him about the brand and his designs and his work. The designer's full name is Toshiaki Watanabe. He attended Bunka, which is a very well-known, it's like Central St. Martin's, but for Japan, it's a very well-known fashion institute. Cottle is run by Toshi-san and his wife, Yukari, and a team of just 8 people in his hometown of Kojima. Kojima you may have heard of because it's sort of the like jeans street. It's like all about indigo and denim, and that is really one of the sort of heartlands of textile in Japan. Cottle in some ways feels like the natural end progression of everything we've been talking about. It's extremely slow made, it's extremely fabric focused, and he develops his own fabrics. So it's like everything we've been talking about taken to its logical end, which is all the clothing is made in this atelier. They don't share the work. So one person makes the garment from start to finish, and that's it. And that is why if you go on their website and you try to order something from them, which they are they're both like sort of unavailable and very available. They're very nice. They're very friendly. I messaged them to get some more photos and pictures and they responded very quickly. But at the same time, because the process of making the clothes takes so long, you can put an order in and you probably won't receive it for a couple of months. The showroom had a lot of clothing because they don't really make seasonal collections. They technically just have one big collection that they keep adding to.
Every new item, every new fabric just gets integrated into the collection. And eventually, if he runs out of fabrics, then it will disappear. Sure. So it's a very organic way of thinking.
Which I kind of like that. I don't know, it does say something about consumption. And like, I understand, I'm totally with it. I understand why the industry works with these seasonal collections and you get new clothes and the sort of ebb and flow of like buying for the season. Though, of course, not everyone even lives in a country that has like a traditional autumn, winter, or spring, summer season. Everyone likes a rebel. Everyone likes someone who is able to do their own thing and make it work. And it certainly seems like he's making it work. Interestingly enough, 90% of their customers are non-Japanese foreigners. So they are doing most of their business with people who are not from Japan. I can't quite put my finger on why that might be. I do think the way the business is constructed has so much mystique to it and so much allure that you really sort of have to be so into clothing to want to go and get these pieces. Because like I said, you can order online. A lot of people do and can go directly to the atelier and get something essentially made to measure. Like they'll try on a piece and then they still have to make that piece for you. And then they also do little like pop-up stores. So they do have stockists. You can actually buy their stuff from a store in the US that have put in an order. And they were telling me that the way they do orders for multi-brand retailers is also sort of not made to measure, but they make adjustments. So if they're making something for a Western audience, maybe they'll make the sleeves longer or they'll make the hem longer to adjust, for bigger bodies. And if they make things for a store that is in a tropical area, they'll take the linings out to make them a bit more breathable. So because of the way they make the clothes, they are able also to adjust the pieces for whoever's buying them. One of the sensibilities that Toshi-san embraces is bits of broken and unraveling details. So some of the buttons are kintsugi buttons, which is a practice that when something is broken, you fix it with gold. And so it's sort of like broken and made whole again in a beautiful way. And his wife makes those buttons. He says partially he likes to include details like that because of the spiritual idea that only God can make perfect things. So as a human, he can only make things with flaws.
その完成されたものっていうのは神様が作る。だからそういう人間を作るのが少し未完成。
So for instance, when you go to like a shrine and you have like one of the staircases a bit, dangling. Yeah. Like he's like, yeah, that's also part of like what we have as a human experience. Because what we humans do make is slightly, it's always going to be more imperfect. Yeah.
They also hand dye the garments with botanical dyes, which dyes, baby, they'll never go away. You're going to be hearing it over and over again.
So you can see like you can see like how you have some color differences. Like this would be also coming to this imperfect human experience. Yeah. Well.
A lot of the conversations I had reminded me of, I'm reading Brave New World for the first time. If you've never read it, it was written in the 1930s, I think. And it's one of those, it's sort of speculative fiction. It's a little post-apocalyptic. It's essentially about a society where people are bred. It's not really eugenic. Well, it's hard to describe, but essentially most people are made in factories. They don't have parents and they are made to be in specific classes. So they'll make, I forget what they're called, but you're in the alpha class or you're in the gamma class. And so you work in this sort of facility. The whole society is organized around staying in your place, making things to be consumed and consuming things. And they sort of do also this programming and sort of brainwashing as you're young so that you are into that. And one of the most interesting things about the book that I thought, which was very relevant and almost a little haunting, is they're always talking, or the author is always describing what people wear in this world, in the Brave New World. And he's always like, oh, her viscose, bright green 2-piece set or whatever. He's always talking about how it's acetate and viscose and made out of synthetic materials and dyed in a synthetic way. And it's just so interesting that in the 1930s, stuff like this I find is always both sort of comforting and sort of horrible, which is everyone has been concerned about these things for decades and sometimes centuries. Same thing oh, TikTok is rotting our kids' brains, and then you go back to ancient Greek and they're like, these kids are idiots. So it's sort of feel we've always had the same problems around consumption and concerns over class and the way our society is set up. But I thought it was really notable that, what's his name? Aldous Huxley included the way clothing is formulated in this apocalyptic future is extremely separated from natural construction and natural fibers, because they really just they breed people to make clothing in a factory so that other people will wear them. And they even talk about how the clothes are not meant to be mended. If your clothes tear, you should throw them away and buy new ones. That's part of the brainwashing they do in Brave New World. Anyway, I actually haven't finished it. And I think there are problems with the book, but super interesting read. It reminds me a little bit of American Psycho. I just love when books that have a strong societal message include clothes, because I do think the way we wear clothes and the way we manufacture clothes says so much about our society and our environment and the way we relate to each other. I'm done. I won't talk about it anymore. So Cottle, they develop and design their own fabrics. I asked, because at this point I'm seeing washi everywhere. I was like, do you have anything made with washi, with mulberry? And they said no. But they had garments that were inspired by traditional kimono made with washi fabric. So there's essentially this thing called kamiko. Funnily enough, Issey Miyake also did a take on washi fabric for Spring Summer 2025. This article says, the creative director Satoshi Kondo pays tribute to the kamiko fabric tradition made from fine hemp fibers and Japanese paper. But these pieces that are inspired by paper are not actually made with it. It's made with this garabu silk, which is traditionally made by 100% cotton, but they mixed it with silk to create their own original material. And it is specifically spun on a garabu machine, which creates non-uniform, it's not very finely spun, but it has a very unique warmth that is usually only seen on hand-spun yarn. I also asked if there was anything that was a particular challenge to design, and they said that they have a couple of pieces. This was one of my favorite things that I saw. They have a couple of pieces that have a very specific shoulder construction to them. So he was talking about the design challenge, especially when you're making unisex clothes. You have people who have very different shoulder shapes. I've talked about this before. I have relatively broad shoulders, which helps me fit into menswear, but not everyone has broad shoulders. And the issue with that, of course, is that when you have, the sweater doesn't have it, but when you have the seam on the corner here, you know, if that's really off someone's shoulder, it will look weird. So they have this sort of curved shoulder seam. He was wearing a jacket that had it, which allows people with all sorts of shoulder lengths to wear the same garment and it'll fit no matter what. He was particularly trying to design something that both he and his wife could wear. And how did you come up with this? Just kept trying different ideas.
With a Japanese style kimono.
Oh, it's like this.
And the big wide arm lengths.
I was asking about general fit issues, and they were saying they get a lot of customer feedback since they do a lot of made to measure and pop-ups and people come to the atelier. They get to work on things with them and get feedback and make changes based off of those experiences. Same question I had for him that I had with pretty much everyone was, what's next? How can you grow this sort of business if everything is being made in an atelier with 8 people? Like, you can't bring prices down really, and you can't make that much more. And he's saying he does want to grow, but he wants to maintain the quality and craftsmanship that the brand currently has. It's inherently very difficult to scale a brand without farming out production or moving to less time-intensive processes. And obviously, because of all this, it's very expensive. So I candidly asked, I was like, are you trying to lower costs in any way to make it more accessible? And the answer was essentially no. He was like, the clothing costs what it costs. And we can get a little bit into pricing later, but he's like, it takes this much time and money to develop the fabric. It takes this much time to put the piece together, to have one of my people create the piece. And then it takes whatever, this much time and money to ship it to you. And that's how much the clothing costs. And I was kind of like, I said something which was wrong. I was like, you're an artist, you know, the piece is going to be what the piece is. Like, you're not producing it with pricing in mind. But he said no, because an artist, the value of art is often on an idea, on perceived value. The value of the clothing is just based off of the time and effort and money that went into it. And that's it. You know, he's not saying, oh, this took $5, but because someone thinks it's worth $2 million, that's how much we're going to price it. A conversation came up between me and my husband later, after we had left the showroom, about pricing in general, which I thought was very interesting because, you know, I'm personally am not really able to afford a brand like this unless I was not interested in having savings, which is a type of person that exists for sure. But what my husband was saying is he's just worried about the mushy middle of this sort of pricing. And he's coming from the point of view of cameras, because when he spends a lot of money on something, it's usually a camera. And he was saying, you know, there's a group of people obviously who want a camera. They're going to spend like $400, $500, $600 on that, you know, because cameras are expensive in general, but that's within their budget. That's what they're going to go for. And then there are people who have a lot of money who are spending $6,000. There's really amazing, very expensive cameras. And then things in the middle between that don't really sell. And that's kind of what I'm worried about with these brands, is they have stuff that's like, the shirts are like $250 to $400. The jacket's like $1,000. And, you know, you have people who shop the high street or thrift or get even archive designers secondhand. It's oftentimes not even that expensive. And then you have people who are shopping at, I don't know, Miu Miu and Dior and Prada and Chanel or whatever, and they're spending thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. And as much as I think something like Cottle has a really interesting thing to offer, which is specialization and a very beautiful experience when you get your clothes, I don't know if those luxury customers certainly the lower priced customers are not going to be able to come up to that. And so I guess the question is like, will the luxury customers be interested in something that's a little bit crunchier? It's really about the vibe and the message and how it was created. And I do really think people love the story, and they love to hear about how the clothes are created to a certain extent. I think it depends on the customer. So anyway, this mushy middle pricing, I think obviously they're making it work for them. What they're offering is incredibly high quality and beautifully designed. And the marketing around it, because of how they're offering it, has really worked. So maybe it's not an issue, but it was something we were thinking about. The next brand is actually the brand that originally invited me to Paris. I'm not going to lie. I got one invitation. It was from this brand. They were just like, come see our showroom. I was like, okay, I'll buy my tickets. And that's all it took when you have a place to stay. Anyway, so the designer Alessandro Tondolo, his parents are Mexican and Italian, but he grew up in Switzerland and then went to school at Central St. Martin. And I met with him and Leopold Fidel Storp, who is a designer and production manager at Tondolo, and they're working on it together. It is a London-based brand. It was started in 2023. They're also all natural materials, but their style is a little bit more like edgy, a little bit more avant-garde. It's a little less crunchy looking on the outside. And we were talking a lot about, same things, girl, same things over and over again. Sustainability, does the customer actually care about sustainability, or do they just care about a cute design and the right price? We were talking a lot about price point. I looked up their stuff online right now. It's like deeply on sale on all the sites I saw. We were talking about Essence. Apparently there's been some Essence drama, but I believe what I heard, listen, a lot of people have Essence drama. I think Essence put in an order and then they were like, oh, never mind, we don't want the order, but the clothes were already made. They just had to sell the clothes themselves. Stuff like that for a small brand, really, you don't have money or investors to fall back on. That can really be destructive for a small brand. So I feel for them for sure. And an interesting thing they actually said about sales pricing is, I was asking about where their customer was based. They said that they do have a lot of East Asian customers. And a big difference for them is that their UK customers or their European customers like a lot of their more subdued pieces, the everyday wearable stuff. And they'll wait until things are 60 to 70% before buying, whereas their East Asian customers will get stuff that's way more out there and buy it full price. So entirely different shopping habits there. Their new season, Autumn-Winter 2026, is called Contego. It is inspired by flowers that grow on other things. His graduation collection was inspired by mushrooms, so obviously a lot of botanical things here. Their fleece is one of their big sellers. One of my favorite things was this scarf that was sort of made up of little squares. I thought that really bridged the everyday wearable stuff with the stuff that's a little bit more avant-garde. They've also been trying to make the brand a little bit more mature. I love this like business strategy stuff. I'm sorry if no one else is interested, but I'm interested. Business strategy. So they're trying to make the brand a little bit more mature, or at least cater to a more mature group of people, because like I said, you make stuff with natural materials, you try to make really high quality stuff. It's expensive to make, the prices are high. It's hard to sell expensive clothes to young people. Young people generally don't have as much money as an older group of customers. So they are trying to focus a little bit on a more mature clientele, which has affected, because I think the nature of their designs, they do get a lot of interest from like musical artists and from editorials. And I think though that's probably really exciting for a brand at the start, they've been pulling back a little bit on that because they just, it's a lot of work to send out stuff and get it returned, and no money is exchanged often with these things. They're just lending them out and it takes time. And, maybe the pieces don't come back in great shape. And they're like, well, are those even the customers that we're trying to access, to pitch things to? Do we want to seem like a very editorial brand? No, they want to sell their clothes to people. So that's something I think they're revising in their strategy. Also, I would be doing this too. They're hoarding all their fabric scraps. They're trying to find ways to reuse their fabric scraps. There's all these odds and ends when you cut things out of textiles. There's little bits left over. So they had all sorts of fun stuff made out of parts of fabric. They had these lamps that I really liked. I think they said Bjork almost bought one, but then she was like, I have too much stuff to bring back home. So she didn't get one. But I thought they were like cool. I thought they were like, you know, like the paper lamps from IKEA. I have 2 of them in my house. They're both in bad shape. They're like cooler, updated versions of that. I don't know. I thought they would sell. And then they also had a little furry balaclava, which I had a lot of fun with, and a little yarn boutonniere that I put on my coat, still on my coat. Haven't taken it off because it matched the blue thread in my coat really well. And so I wore that for the rest of the day. The last showroom we went where they were just hosting one brand was Niceness. It's like a grown-ass man brand. Like, this is nice stuff for men who have money and are fashion conscious but don't want to be looking too crazy. Quoting from a Substack that I like, Duchamp, he said of the designer, his approach is meticulous, deceptive in its simplicity, and utterly brilliant. Their motto for the brand is good is good, which I kind of like it. It's just like, well, as you make good stuff, it's going to be good. Like, it's kind of simple. Ultimately, they are inspired by designs from all around the world, military, workwear, lots of vintage American styles, but they'll mix them with European designs or Japanese. All their clothing is produced in Japan. And I asked them about their customer base as well. They said about 60% of the business is in Japan, a lot of South Korea, and they've been seeing a lot more in North American markets recently, which I have as well. Like Niceness, I feel like in the last year or two, I've seen a lot more people in the US own their pieces. It is one of the older brands we talked to. It was founded in 2017. It's not even that old. And the designer's name is Yuichi Go. This season, they had this really nice, fancy leather jacket with curved arms. So it was sort of a mixture of British tailoring and an American car coat. Everything there was a size large, I believe. That was like their sample size. I tried on the coat. I actually didn't have huge expectations for how it would look on me, but it looked really good. They had a beautiful jacket made out of this multicolored kasuri yarn, an Indian fabric button-up, a lot of Indian fabrics recently. I do think that Indian fabrics and also Indian designers have really been seeing a come up recently. And they had a couple of these, what I'm calling like trompe-l'oeil pieces. So they were linen jackets that were printed. So essentially what they did is they scanned old faded denim and then printed that onto linen. So it looks like denim, but it's not. And then they had another striped jacket with a similar treatment, plus another little extra detail that I really liked.
It's
it's wide.
So it's like a
there's a lot of
details.
secrets.
Really fun. Yeah, wait, is it?
And then you have
double
two.
Also?
Yeah, it's 2 pockets.
Specifically, they said they had done that design because they wanted it to be an in-person experience. When you see these garments in photos, you can't really tell that it's not just denim or it's not just, you know, a woven striped pattern, and instead that it's a print. So it's sort of trying to engage the customer to shop in person and also experience the clothes in person. And ultimately, those people will wear those clothes in person, and the other people who hang out with them in person will appreciate the design. I thought it was sort of tongue-in-cheek. It's like a little sense of humor. Wherever you looked, there was an added detail to the clothes that would make me giggle. They work a lot with leather, and they had this little kind of shearling furry shawl with a little sheep's head on it. I don't know. I just felt like they weren't taking it all so seriously, even though they're making really beautiful, exquisitely crafted clothing. My last stop was Welcome Edition, and this was like the most trade show version of Paris Fashion Week as a trade show. It was filled with booths. It was loud. They were blasting music. It was the end of our second day. I like really ran out of steam at Welcome Edition, unfortunately, but it was a great one-stop shop at the same time. I had 2 brands that I had like miniature appointments to talk to. The first one is menswear, which is technically a womenswear brand, but I find it's for people like me who like menswear in some ways, but not necessarily. There is stuff that's femme, though they did say this season they were adding men's sizing. I don't actually know if that means that the pattern has changed in any way or they're just increasing the sizing, so they just have bigger sizes. Womenswear was founded by Lauren Yates in Bangkok in 2015, and it is built around stories of pioneering women from the 20th century. They collaborate with a lot of local Thai artisans, blending historical research with craft. So sort of similar, I would say, to the relationship Graziano and Gutierrez has with artisan craft makers in Mexico. They're doing a very similar thing in Thailand. Their Autumn-Winter 2026 collection is called Torque and Tailwinds, and it is inspired by Brooke Land's racing circuit. She said that In person, I heard Brooklyn, and I was like, oh, I don't know this racing circuit because I live in Brooklyn. And I looked it up later, and Brooklands is in England. It was the world's first purpose-built motor racing circuit constructed at Weybridge, Surrey in 1907. Many women worked on the site manufacturing aircraft during World War I as the men were called to war. And famously, there was an English aeronautical engineer, motorcycle racer, and sports car racer. Her name was Beatrice Schilling. She won a race on a motorcycle she modified herself at the track in the 1930s. My favorite pieces were probably this brown waxed alpine smock. They also had a couple of fly blazers, one in dark green denim and one in houndstooth, and a checked heirloom cotton engineer's jacket with matching women's wear work jeans. And this textile is, get this, woven from naturally brown cotton fiber and organic dyed indigo yarns. And brown heirloom cotton is grown, spun, and woven entirely in that region. They have been trying to find their own uses for production scraps, so they have this line called Good Ol' What's-Her-Face, which is designed to support their community of artisans during difficult times, and it uses vintage or repurposed materials and end of production scraps that would otherwise go in the landfill. Possibly one of the most amazing pieces I saw the whole trip were their Borough for Peace work jeans, made by women artisans of the Muslim minority in the Yala province. They make them from the endless amounts of textile waste that end up in Thailand. I believe those are made from flannel shirts. I was gifted 2 things at their booth very kindly. I was gifted, like little things along the way. Niceness gave us like little tote bags. Women's Wear gave me this gorgeous sweater and a pair of jeans, which was very, very kind of them to bring all the way from Thailand. Anyway, we also visited Haversack, which now this is an older brand. They were launched in 1997 in Fukuoka, Japan, and it is the brainchild of Koji Norihide, who was there, but he had a sales associate who spoke English, who was communicating with us. The brand is named after the standard issue U.S. Army bag, known for its strength and durability, 2 key components behind the brand. It was obviously heavily inspired by elements of vintage clothing and design, military wear, workwear, dress, and uniform. They were saying about 70% of their customer base is Japanese and about 30% is international, and they are also entirely designed and produced in Japan. They do some original fabric development as well. It's interesting, like a brand like this, I'm like, right now they almost feel trendy, but they've been around and doing this stuff forever. I'm gonna be honest, I didn't do a great job interviewing them. I mean, I have like the very basics of the brand. I don't know if you need to know that they have like 2 lines and one is more casual and one is more suiting and it's technically unisex, but they have a men's and women's, whatever. It doesn't matter. If you're really interested, you look on their website. I personally didn't get like any big scoops, I think, while I was there, but they were very kind. It's just, I had heard Smooth Operator playing like 3 times that day, and it came on again while I was at their booth, and I was like, I need to get out of here. Some other brands very quickly that we saw: Modment, which I talked about in my last video. It is a sub-brand of Nenga started by the gentleman who designed engineered garments or created engineered garments. And yeah, it was just so funny that I like read about it and then I saw it in person and I was like, oh, I know you guys. And they were like, okay, whatever you say. And then Hey Matt Textile, which is a favorite of my Discord, really nice knitted beanies and all sorts of things. J Press was there, Nigel Capeborn was there. Nigel Capeborn, I've mentioned them before, technically a British company. Are they owned, or they work very closely with a Japanese company to distribute in Japan? They have a huge Japanese base, and they're also very, military and workwear oriented. So we sort of breezed through their booth. Finally, we were like, well, let's check out downstairs before we go. And my friends were there. There's this brand called Indi Ash, which is a Brooklyn-based brand. It was started, I believe, as a way to offer beautiful little clothes for children, but now they do a lot of clothes for adults. The designer, his name is Matthew April, I believe. I haven't said his last name before. I've honestly only met him twice now, but sometimes, you just connect with people and you're like, we're kikiing, like we're so close. They get most of their woven fabric from India. I'm not even sure anything stood out to me because I loved all the pieces. I love everything he makes, and he has this very specific color palette that I think is unique to his stuff. So a little bit more behind the scenes for like a small independent brand. He generally produces 30 to 70 pieces of a style every season. His factory minimum, like the factories he works with, they generally have a minimum of 50 pieces. So like he can't order something from a factory if he doesn't order 50 pieces or more. And his minimum for buyers, so if someone comes and wants to have his brand at their store, is $3,000. So they have to spend $3,000 on an order to work with him. And that's usually about like 15 pieces minimum. He works with about 10 stockists overall. We were talking a lot about the tariffs. There were really high tariffs on India. Actually, until recently, it was about 50%. And Trump just came to a trade agreement with them, which lowered it to 18%, which seems good, except I believe it used to be around 2.5%. Listen, overall, the issue with the tariff situation is like, yes, it's putting people fully out of business, but also it's just volatile. And it's really hard to make business decisions when you don't know what the cost of your products is going to be, and that affects the pricing, and it has a lot of knock-on effects. So I fully understand how frustrated people are with the tariff situation, and it's also not like what are we doing with all our tariff income? So he also said that he is really trying to bring his prices, or not even bring his prices down, but keep his prices accessible, because he said, I want everyday people to understand what goes into making garments, how things can look and feel if they're made the right way or a better way. And yeah, I can't do that at $400. He wants to sell this to people who have enough money, obviously, to still spend $200 on something, but a lot of people are willing to spend that amount of money on something that's really good quality versus $400, $500. You're pricing people out very quickly. And specifically which this is not like a secret necessarily, but he was open with me about how things get priced. So let's say something costs about $70 to make, including the hardware and the zippers and all the bits and bobs. He then probably doubles that price as his wholesale prices to buyers. So they'll buy something that's, say, like at $140, and then those buyers will probably double it again to cover all of their costs. This is not like price gouging. This is not something crazy. This is kind of status quo. So they'll double it again, and then, yeah, you wind up with something that's about $300 for a shirt. Now think about how cheap some of your clothes are. And you can only imagine the cost of making them is incredibly low. And that's through any number of reasons, whether that's quality or extremely low wages for whoever's making it or unsafe conditions. That unfortunately is the reality of how clothing is made. In order for us to get affordable clothing, a lot of corners get cut. I have a lot of respect for these independent brands who are trying to make things in the way that they think is the most beautiful, expresses, their artistic intent, and also is good for their customer and good for the people who are making the clothes. Very, very admirable. But obviously there's also a general frustration that most people can't afford these clothes. But also it's fun to learn about how clothes are made and different types of fabrics and dyeing techniques, and it's tough, but I love it. And I'm so glad I went. And yeah, I guess let me know what you guys thought of a video like this. Was this helpful? Was this interesting? Did you wish I had talked about other things? Did you wish I had gone to different kinds of brands, other kinds of brands, other kinds of showrooms? You were like, these were not the brands I wanted to see. Whatever you guys think, I would love to hear it. Thanks so much for watching.